Business and the way we do business is changing at a quantum pace. How do companies develop a skilled workforce capable of performing at this pace of change? Well, that's a great question, and it's the topic of our panel. Helping us find the right answers is Wendy Harrington, a consultant, financial savant, and angel investor. Welcome.
Thanks, Gene.
So your panel had a pretty challenging question posed to it.
It is, and it's a topic that a lot of companies are struggling with today. The pace of technology has really increased the overall pace of change. And it's a tough thing for companies and the employees within those companies to deal with in a way that everybody feels empowered and able to have the impact that they want to have.
Now, I will say that there are some very big names on this panel. Who stood out?
Yeah, there's three people I would call out. One is Lynn Power. She's a marketer, CEO, and principal. She's also a big entrepreneur and spent 30 years in the world of advertising and now has a consultancy focused on building brands. And she's really helping those companies navigate this type of change. The second one is Daniel Schiff. So very different profile, a PhD student at the Georgia Institute of Technology. He's studying artificial intelligence policy. And then the third individual I'd like to call out is Frank Kovacs. He's a global head of digital business, and he's got a lot of technology background, and he's using that to really think through the implications of technology on individuals and different industries. Probably not surprising, there's no easy answer to this. And so we dove into a couple of themes, looking at things like which attributes would actually allow companies to continuously reskill and unlock that potential. We looked at potential solutions. What could they look like and what would be some of those barriers and challenges? And then we closed out on really envisioning the future of work and thinking about what it would look like from the company's perspective as well as employees and the changes that would need to happen to really make it a reality. I think one of the things that was consistently called out across the individuals on the panel is that technology could really help people adapt to this pace of change by personalizing the learning more. So if I understand where you are, where you're struggling, where you have strengths, how you like to learn, I could tailor that learning for you. So it's really relevant and it's going at the pace that you would like it to go to. And that also scales really easily. So if you could do that across your enterprise, across your company, it could be a much better way for people and a more efficient way for people to learn. But people said it wasn't enough. They also needed some on-the-job training there too and some individual coaching and mentoring. I think that people said they really feel deeply that transparency is what builds trust. And you need trust to be able to take on some of these more challenging tasks. You need trust to be able to take risks in an organization. And you need trust to feel like you can share what's really going on, what's challenging, what's working, what's not working. And so transparency is really essential to that. Mentoring is something that's been around for a long time, and most people can call out mentors in their career who have made a difference, not so much in the technical learning of skills, but in the support for their careers. Having mentors, usually more than one over the course of your career, can really help build that connection and trust and help you become a better leader as well. The second theme is really thinking about what aspects would you need in a potential solution. And while we all think about, these would be the holy grails, each one comes with its own barriers or challenges to implementation. I think the biggest overarching sentiment from across the group was that change needs to happen at every level and every component. So at one level, you need the right cultures and values. So you can talk about personalized learning being important. You can talk about the importance of change, but is the culture supporting that? You have to think about it early on in the process, not just for your current group of employees, but as you're recruiting new employees, and what are the values and cultural norms that you talk about there, and as you onboard them, are those starting to come to life? Are you reinforcing those? And then just as we talked about before, on-the-job training, mentorship, is that reinforcing those same things? Are you providing the tools and capabilities and access and transparency that you said you do? And then lastly, infrastructure. A lot of these things actually need some technology and process behind them to make sure that people have easy access to it and that they're getting the feedback that they need.
And your third theme, tell us about that.
Yeah, that was really interesting because we started to talk about, can you envision the future of work? Can you envision what this looks like as opposed to a list of the 10 things that we need to do? And so it was getting the group really immersed in a new vision for how work could look and feel. One level, we talked about recruiting being part of where you have the conversation about culture, but recruiting is also where you start to think about diversity in your workforce.
So, Wendy, do you kind of see the future of onboarding changing quite a bit or evolving?
I do, because I think traditionally it's been more the checklist. And as technologies become more pervasive, you see more technology things on that checklist, right? Let me make sure you know how to use the HR system that we have. And how about the expense system and the calendaring system? And let me get your email set up. And, oh, here's our document sharing and here's our collaboration system. And so it's become this big checklist. But what's a little bit gotten forgotten is, how do you get that individual feeling like they're part of the company? What's the introduction to the culture that you can do? How do you welcome and onboard them and make sure they're getting the skills and the feedback and the mentoring that you need? And we did talk quite a bit about effective interviewing, aligning on the core values that the organization team needs, and helping the interviewers figure out the right questions to ask. So, for example, if you're looking for something like collaboration, you don't want to just say, hey, tell me about your ability to collaborate, but rather ask about a time when the team performed at their best, or a time when they supported and built upon, a peer's work. So you're really trying to get at that skill set without naming it for the candidate. The other thing that we talked about was using more skill-based interviews to focus on the actual skills needed for the job. And some of those, aren't just the technical skills, they're the social, emotional skills. And if you do it right, you actually get each member of your team who's doing the interviewing to tackle a different part of that. So you get a more holistic view of the candidate. Plus, they don't feel like they're answering the same question 7 times. There were some great ideas around onboarding. Could you start maybe with a 2-day introduction to the company, what somebody's come on board? So everybody who's joined Company X in the last 30 days, you're part of this group. And we'll take you through a combination of exercises, of team bonding, just casual lunches. So getting you together, and you can ask the silly questions, that probably aren't the most productive use of time with your boss, or maybe not even with a colleague knows, but you start to really get a feel for the organization. And you also start to get to know the other departments or the other functions within the organization. So you're starting to build bonds and knowledge at the same time. It's essential, right? And that then helps you forge a longer-term relationship that ideally adds to greater engagement in the organization. The question around culture is, how can you engage in those everyday work conversations where you're really actively listening to what employees are telling you, and then take what they say seriously so that you can actually make the changes in the organization. Because if you're designing programs for them, you want to make sure that you're actually listening to their feedback on it.
Now, I know earlier you talked about trying to diversify teams. How do you eliminate that unconscious bias?
One is to try and institute blind recruiting that helps level the playing field. And by that, I mean, you can introduce resumes, for example, without any individual's name on it. Another thing you can do is run your job descriptions through some tools. And those tools can actually flag if you're being biased in the wording or the attributes that you're looking for without actually knowing it. The third one that people talk about is unconscious bias, and there's some training and tools to help you address that so that when you're actually interviewing or in your day-to-day working relationships, you're more hyper aware of those things to make sure they don't sneak into the conversation.